hear us okay?
Yes, I hear you great.
Can you hear him, Xavier?
I sure can.
Can you hear Xavier, Nathan?
I can.
Could you hear the music?
Good.
Okay,
Excellent.
great. All right. So, hey, Nathan, thanks for doing this. We are live right now on Theta Edgecast and Theta.tv. What I'm going to do is play our introduction real quick, and I'll tee off the conversation. Does that sound good?
Blended.
Awesome. Okay.
You're listening to the Zetetic Newscast on the Zetetic News Network with your hosts, Dave, and Xavier Diamond. Proceed by inquiry.
All right, welcome to episode 18 of the Zetetic Newscast. We're your hosts, Dave, and Xavier Diamant. It is February 12th, 2021. Pretty numerologically interesting day to have this
Indeed.
conversation with our very special guest, Nathan Oakley1980, who runs the Flat Earth Debate. Nathan, we are currently live streaming right now on Theta.tv. We've been, banned like, in perhaps a lesser extent than you have on YouTube. So we're looking at alternatives. Would love to take that conversation offline and get you on Theta.tv. And you've got a really awesome model, I think, on YouTube with your live panel type discussions. And, we're Zetetic.news. So you might recognize the flat earth illusion there with the Zetetic moniker. We also thought Z was sort of on the opposite side of the alphabet as C. And you can see we've styled our logo sort of like CNN, but the antithetical sort of construction of CNN. So our whole thing about obviously we do talk about flat earth, but we talk about everything current events related, and our whole motto is, proceed by inquiry. And if you do that, it is interesting, the whole flat earth discussion. And, we love your work, great admirers of it, and you, to the extent that we actually installed a permanent live channel section of our site. So as a next generation, news organization and aggregator, TV, right? You can go over to this tab on our page, and as you do your live streams every I think 9 a.m. Eastern with your live panel discussions, people can come over here and watch you have that discussion. And I just love the model that you have, and would love for you in your own words for the audience who may not have exposure to you before we get into the nitty-gritty. Could you introduce yourself, how you, a little bit about your background, how you arrived to this conclusion that the Earth is observably flat, to use your words, and, talk about a little bit about your channel, the Flat Earth Debate, and what you guys are doing there and what you're trying to accomplish, and then we'll just go from there.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me.
Our pleasure.
I'm Nathan Oakley, and as you already mentioned, I run the Flat Earth Debate on my channel, which is after my own name, Nathan Oakley, or NathanOakley1980. So I've got a couple of different channels. And how did I find out Earth was flat? Well, where do I start in the story? I'll start with the point where I found out, which was from Math Powerland. So I watched a Math Powerland video on YouTube, and Math Powerland was talking about I don't know what, because I can't quite remember which video it was, but nevertheless he was talking about this subject, and he just happened to say the words flat earth without them being mentioned in the way that they're typically mentioned, which is under the guise of ridicule. So he said it in a very non-ridiculing way, and it just made my ears prick up. And immediately, as soon as I heard him say it in that way, what flashed before my eyes were all of the times I'd spent on airliners traveling around the world as a rep, and looking out through the back window of the aeroplane and seeing the ground beneath me being flat, and going, wow, at the time, I wish I could get higher to see the Earth curve. Knowing full well now that you couldn't do that, and that the horizon isn't Earth curve, but back then, as a globe believing normie, that's what I thought. I wish I could get higher to see Earth curve, which, if you paraphrase it, is me saying, look how flat it is. But like I say, that went through my mind when I heard Math Powerland's video. What was the other question? I forgot the other one now.
Well, your channel, so and it's an interesting parallel to myself. I have been a rep in my lifetime, ridden on many planes, and it was actually there that I discovered some of the Flat Earth Society letters. That was my initial discovery, and I was literally on a plane, and it's a contradiction when you're in a plane, what you're told about horizon and how things vanish beyond the curve and all of that. And then here I am, 35,000 feet, and it's just like, wow. Some of this, it resonated with me, and I didn't necessarily believe it right off the bat, nor did you. Probably, maybe you did, I don't know. But the second question was, how did you get from that point to what you're doing now? It's like almost a full-time job, running the flat earth debate on YouTube.
Well, that was a very much a conscious decision to have a show that had some longevity. So originally I was making just one-off videos while I was working at the time, and that spanned into doing interviews for anybody that I could find that knew anything about the subject of flat Earth. So originally I was making a show called Flat Earth Debate, and not Flat Earth Debate. Originally I was making a show called Flat Earth UK. Get it right. And Flat Earth UK was basically me asking anybody who I came across that I knew about the subject, what they knew about it, how they found out, pretty much as you've asked me, and just seeing what was what and who knew about what. And over a course of time, I got a general idea of the history of the subject, and indeed some of the fakery in history itself, which was also interesting, along with the sort of backstory of heliocentrism and the solar system and where it all came from. So that was sort of given to me by people who had done a lot more research on the subject at the time than I had, and I sort of gathered up all that information from them. But eventually you run out of people to interview. There is only so many people that are prevalent on the subject and actually out there doing stuff to interview. So eventually I thought, what can I do? I want to do this full time. I need something that I can do on a daily basis. And based on the idea that the majority of the Western world are under the misapprehension that they're on a sphere, it was a logical thing to think, well, this subject will always be debated about until the paradigm changes for everybody to flat Earth. Definitely. In other words, I'll always have a show.
So who's been the highest profile individual in, say, the establishment, whether it's in academia or the sciences, who have actually had the balls to come and do one of these debates with you?
Can't name anybody of note that has come from academia. Nobody's going to come to our little trench, right? So we're very much in the thick of the trenches at ground level, fighting with fundies. And the reason that we won't get anybody like Neil deGrasse Tyson or Brian Cox is because they're spouting a very different rhetoric to the rhetoric that we defend on Flat Earth Debate. So there's trench level rhetoric, which is very much completely contradictory or the polar opposite to the church level rhetoric. The heliocentric priests like Cox and Tyson, they're spouting very different rhetoric. Would you like an example?
Sure.
So Cox and Tyson would describe gravity not as a force but as the bending of pseudo-Riemannian force space, whereas at trench level, to get around the fact that we can't have a sky vacuum unless they can invoke some sort of force to hold gas here, they invoke gravity as a force. Same thing goes for Coriolis deviation. So you've got Neil deGrasse Tyson as an example giving you a tweet that says a ball made a field goal because Earth turned underneath it. So you're observing not actual deflection from the stands, Coriolis effect. Well, if you were to put that argument, i.e. the globe's actual position, to somebody on the flat earth debate that's on the globe side, they'd say, oh, Tyson's an idiot. He doesn't understand that the earth and atmosphere move together. I assume there's no Coriolis deviation, there's no effect to show that we're spinning, but I assume we're spinning along with the atmosphere in violation of the first law of thermodynamics, completely contradicting Neil deGrasse Tyson. So if someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson was to come to the debate, he would actually lay down the rhetoric and it would be very quick and swift to debunk it. So Neil deGrasse Tyson says Earth turns under a football. Well, Mr. deGrasse Tyson, why doesn't it turn under an aeroplane? It's also left the non-inertial claim to be spinning reference frame of Earth. It would have Earth turn underneath it and it doesn't. End of argument.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I heard you recently tangle with some guy who ended up criticizing your restatement of Coriolis as if it was your position to begin with.
Right.
Yes, like Simon Dan. So you get to the point where, like with Coriolis, same example, you explain to a guy in the trenches fighting for the globe that Earth is claimed to turn underneath as a non-inertial spinning reference frame turning beneath an inertial reference frame to give you Coriolis deflection. That'd be you turning under things not attached. Coriolis effect. You put that to him with an example of Neil deGrasse Tyson, and they'll tell you, prove to me the globe claims we have the Earth turning underneath. And you're like, well, that's what Coriolis is. Well, Simon Dan turned around and, given that I would detail their position back to them, which they'd later deny, he said that my reference frames had been ruined. So he sends me a tweet, literally, I quote, "You and your reference frames have been ruined." Now, as a flat earther, I don't claim any reference frames. The globe claims two of them and Coriolis effect, but he's debunking them because I have to summarise their own position, because when they appreciate that there isn't any Coriolis drift, they challenge us to prove that they claim there is, when they absolutely do.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about your channel is the ire that you have with folks, because it's the norm to hear flat Earth in the pejorative, as you said in your introduction, and yet like most of civilization, all of our greatest achievements were supposedly built by flat earthers, so that they're obviously not that stupid. And it's amazing how other people just get so triggered and twisted into pretzels as you try to unpack it, not realizing that they're the ones making the claim in the first place by supposing that the mainstream narrative is the correct one.
Another thing I noticed is that they constantly move the goalposts. Like, I've just had this kind of conversation amongst some of my friends, and probably now not so good of friends, because I just ask very pointed and intentional questions pertaining to their claims, and then they move the goalpost and say, oh, well, it wouldn't work in your model anyway. And I'm like, well, I haven't posited a model. I don't suppose a model. I'm simply obviating all of the holes in your claims. And that is just like, it ends up in, straw mans and ad homs at that point, and all starting from the basic premise of, well, are you sure you know what you are saying or claim to know? And that's just too much for people.
Exactly. You don't have to make a claim in order to pull apart the current rhetoric based on its claims, and they don't make any sense. You don't suddenly have to provide an alternative explanation in order to challenge that. For example, if somebody asserts that we've got this thing called outer space, a space vacuum, a sky vacuum, you say, well, we have this thing called the second law of thermodynamics, the entropy law. And the entropy law would describe the expansion of gas into that availability of volume, that would be space. So the gas would fill the space. In other words, you can't have a sky vacuum. And that person, the person who you're putting a sky vacuum, the relinquishment of, will challenge you to prove a dome. And like, I don't know what the sky is. There's a massive deception about the sky, and I'm just a mere guy. But I know it's not a sky vacuum because that stands directly in violation of natural law. You, on the globe side, make a positive assertion that the sky is a vacuum. Now, I don't need to provide alternatives to challenge that and debunk it.
Yeah, and a lot of times they'll just try to fixate on a superimposed model that they think you subscribe to, when in fact, an agnostic position is actually typically stronger. It's just saying, well, I don't seek to elevate myself on some sort of epistemological altar simply because I'm obviating problems with your model, you know. And they just that doesn't jive for most people. It's just too much cognitive dissonance to handle that. The paradigm that they've been introduced to throughout their life and inculcated with is based on just completely erroneous presuppositions. And then the only thing that they can do in response to that is to kind of create a sort of gatekeeper effect around their vulnerable epistemological condition and sort of redirect you into all these different rabbit holes that, you know, simply don't address the fact that their model is defunct.
Exactly. It's much easier to hold up what's called a false dichotomy fallacy, where you say,
Right.
well, let's have a little look at your explanation, and we'll have a look at my explanation, and whichever is the stronger explanation becomes our world. And you're like, no, I don't need to hold up an alternative explanation to absolutely pummel your claim that we have a vast availability of volume for gas to fill, but it's just not filling it in violation of natural law. I don't need to come up with a dome to challenge your claim of a sky vacuum. It's not necessary.
Yeah, one of the other things I noticed about your channel is you're sort of laser focused on the observable facts on the ground as far as what is being claimed, i.e., you know, how much curve should we experience per mile, you know, and those sorts of things, other impossibilities presented by the spherical Earth model. How do you address those who come on and argue or obfuscate or, you know, go on tangents about, well, we've got pictures from space? Because I don't think I've seen a debate, not that it's not there, because I haven't, you know, made a complete study of all your work. It's voluminous, right?
Sure.
I'm sure that's been brought up.
Oh, absolutely. It doesn't come off very often because it's a quick debunking. So for the same reasons I've just given you. So if someone asserts, for example, well, we have a picture of the Earth from space. They took a picture when they went to the moon. Well, the journey took place in a second law of thermodynamics violation sky vacuum. So if they travelled through a sky vacuum, then the gas we breathe would have filled that space and we'd all be dead. So no, they didn't take pictures from space. Space is fake. It violates the second law of thermodynamics.
Love it.
Yeah, and they love to come back with the whole, there's the whole astrophysicalist sort of, you know, Einsteinian stuff about space-time. But then they'll say other stuff like, oh, well, it's a gradient.
A gradient is a delta of gas pressure. So when I say you can't have gas pressure without a container, well, you also can't have a gas pressure gradient without a container. Right. It's a delta of gas pressure. So without the container, there can be no pressure, to quote conspiracy cats. And that is in line with natural law. So to assert, well, because I can't have gas pressure without a container, I'll assert that I've got a pressure gradient and then assume the thing I'm trying to prove, which is to say I go outside, point at the sky, assert that it's a vacuum, and say that we've got a gas pressure gradient. Therefore, the sky is a vacuum? Well, no. Equally, you can't have a delta of gas pressure without a container. Gas pressure gradient being that delta.
It's almost like people have this conception that on the molecular or sort of supposed atomic level, they just know where to situate within the context of a spinning terraqueous orb, and that it's that perfectly aligned, you know, Goldilocks kind of scenario whereby everything that they posit to be true happens to work out. And, you know, it's fallacious, obviously, but that's been the sort of low resolution education most people have received is, well, important man say he went here, therefore you must believe. Again, that's very common still. People still think that.
Well, they're being lied to. In that instance, that specific instance, when it comes to space, there are very few people in the arena of this discussion that I can point the finger at and say, that's a liar. And astronauts are one of those groups of people, the individuals that I can point the finger at very specifically and say, that man, that woman is a liar. Because they're on high wire, They're next to green screen, and they're pretending to be in a realm that does not exist, like claiming to be in Narnia. Well, they're not in space. Space is not real. You can't be in a sky vacuum because we'd all be dead. Therefore, they are most definitely lying about being there on their high wires.
But they built this aluminum foil craft that can clearly sustain, a positive pressure system separate from that, right?
Oh, of course.
Aluminum foil.
Yeah, that's a red herring. That's one of the arguments that they like to have, believe it or not. So they'd like to argue all day about whether or not, for instance, the spacesuits will work in the vacuum, because that presupposes that there is a vacuum. Or whether or not rockets can work in a vacuum. Well, that's presupposing that the sky is a vacuum and then discussing whether or not it will work. It's like, no, the sky is not a vacuum. Matters not whether or not you say rockets can or cannot work in a vacuum, because the sky is not a vacuum. It matters not whether or not you say a quarter-inch piece of aluminum can protect you from the vacuum of the sky. The sky is not a vacuum.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, and then a lot of people like to go on the satellite tangent, and, that's part and parcel to the same, gas pressure refutation as well. There might be high altitude craft that produce imagery that can be patched together after the fact to made to look like a sphere. Even in live time, you can apply those effects, but it's not proof that that's in fact the true glimpse of from that supposed altitude that's 17,000 miles an hour around a ball. I mean, it's pretty absurd, but again, it's power suggestion, and a lot of people don't like to go after an entire system that's built around things that they've just had to regurgitate over time, because there's a lot of social proof and social pressures around it, and they don't want to be thought of as a weirdo and all this. But essentially, it's ancillary to the fact that people just don't have nearly as strong of an epistemological ground around these claims regarding the globe as they initially think upon entering into a discussion that maybe has a skeptical orientation and knows the model perhaps better than they do as they're trying to defend it. And it's very interesting.
Well, for any of your audience members that want a few critical points that can have someone who's a ball-believing fundamentalist religious zealot or a normie over a barrel, there's really only three aspects to the heliocentric model. That's the Earth as a sphere in orbit in a sky vacuum. So you can pull those three apart with really just three very simplistic arguments. The first I've already mentioned, which is Coriolis deviation. It is asserted that Earth has Coriolis effect. And Coriolis effect is the effect of you seeing things seem to drift because you turn underneath them. For example, if you had a drone hovering above a roundabout that you were on, as you rotate beneath the hovering drone, it appears to come towards you and go away, come towards you and go away. Now, it's not actually flying towards you, it's you turning underneath that makes it appear that way. That's Coriolis effect. And it is a claim of the globe Earth that globe Earth has Coriolis effect. Therefore, we would observe a 15 degrees an hour deviation as the Earth rotated underneath things not attached, exampled by people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who assert field goals are made because Earth turned underneath the ball when it left the ground. Well, if Earth turns underneath an inertial reference frame to give us Coriolis deviation, then flight times would be reduced, and a flight from Charlotte, North Carolina to Los Angeles, which in actuality takes 4.5 hours, would only take an hour and a half if we had a Coriolis deflection observable from the ground, because Earth would be turning underneath the aeroplane. Now, because the flight times are not reduced, we do not have Earth turning underneath them. Therefore, we don't have Earth turning underneath. There is no Coriolis deviation. Earth is not spinning. So that's point one. Earth isn't spinning. So the whole notion of us turning to cause that motion in the stars, preposterous. We'd have Coriolis deviation. They claim we do not. So we don't observe the effect of Coriolis. Number two, we don't have a sky vacuum. That ball Earth spinning is in a sky vacuum, outer space, with orbits in space. Well, space, a second law of thermodynamics violation, would leave us with no gas to breathe. If the sky was a vacuum, the gas we breathe would fill the space. Debunking all claims from space. This was a former number one. It's now number two in the structure of these arguments, but a very, very, very powerful argument, and the quickest to illustrate to anybody who's not in the know. So if the sky was a vast space for gas to fill, the entropy law dictates that the gas would fill it. That's what gas does, expands at high speeds in all directions to fill the availability of volume it has to fill. Gas fills the volume it has to fill. And what do you know? Space is a space for gas to fill. So fill it must. We'd all be dead if the sky vacuum was real. So that debunks us turning and being in a sky vacuum. Last but by no means least, the fundamental, the most important part of the claim is that we're actually on a spherical surface, a sphere Earth. Well, if the Earth was a sphere with a radius of 3959 miles, then every distance to horizon could be no more than 1.2 times the square root of the observer's height in feet. Now that measurement gives you the geometric horizon, the physical Earth curve obstruction they claim blocks boats and buildings. Well, every distance to horizon can't be beyond a physical limitation of a hill in the way, if that's what they're claiming, a hill getting in the way of boats and buildings at a measurable feet and inches value. Well, we've got demonstrable proof that the horizon is way beyond the geometric limitations that a sphere would offer. Therefore, we do not have a geometric horizon. And at trench level, they'll confirm it with quotes like, "The geometric horizon only exists in the maths." We wouldn't expect to see a geometric horizon. Nobody claims the horizon is Earth curve. Well, these declarations are the debunking of the premise that you are on a sphere. Because on a sphere, it is claimed the horizon is a physical edge blocking things in the distance, with a calculable measurement to give you how much it'll block things at 8 inches per mile squared. Well, that distance is physical, and the horizon we see is not physical. Certainly not a sphere edge. An irony of irony when the controlled opposition against the flat Earth, that would be the Flat Earth Society, suggests our model, which we don't hold up. What do you know? They got boats falling over it. Well, they actually on the sphere have boats falling over an edge. They've got it falling over a sphere edge horizon, physical, that they qualify with feet and inches. And the horizon isn't physical. It's a not actual location where the sky appears to meet the ground. Not an edge for boats to fall over.
Right. You know, it's interesting. There are a lot of folks, you know, who posit that there's a dome, over the flat Earth, and of course the globies think they're retarded. Yet it's actually the globies who believe in a physical barrier. Otherwise, they couldn't have the sky vacuum, right? And global warming, because it all has to be enclosed. And of course, that's when they get into these conversations of, well, gravity's holding it all together, and somehow gravity is biased, against certain materials versus others, and it all just seems very magical. Right. But yet they accuse you of being, you know, sort of the Neanderthal, you know, knuckle dragging flat earther idiot.
Anti-science.
Yeah, and they also think that, you know, you have to be a moron, you know, simple head, to believe in flat Earth. You know, where's your sense of wonder about this space? And it's like actually the idea of a hyperplane, which we've talked about many times on our show, and the fact that we are actually being lied to about the explorable terrain on which we live. That's a more fascinating, wondrous, mysterious universe to me than we just can't seem to get these rockets to go you know, into the sky vacuum. You know, we just can't do that, even though a hot air balloon would be a lot cheaper. Right? If you just use that rocket fuel to power a hot air balloon, you know, couldn't you get out of the dome and the you know, through this into the sky vacuum? Of course, these are all ridiculous, you know, sort of scenarios I'm painting here, but you know, I just think that it's a more wondrous, mysterious idea that, you know, we've been actually lied to, and there's much more to the Earth as we're on it than they're letting us on, you know. Then they're telling us. This is all very deliberate.
Right. I mean, you could argue also that the whole model of the globe is one of the first censorship campaigns. It's a cartographic censorship campaign.
Yeah.
And that it's trying to curtail and create a scarcity model whereby we don't get the proper dimensions and features and expanse of resources and explorable terrain that are actually afforded by the realm in which we live.
Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I can't divine their motivation. I can just divine what they've actually lied about based on the information they give us. So, for example, when you postulated that we were positioned in the public eye as science deniers, well, certainly on Flat Earth debate, nothing could be further from the truth, and it bites a lot of people who come in the ass when they assume that they are in a position to tell us what's what and offer quasi-scientific sounding terms like hypothesis for their explanations. In other words, they'll offer a just-so story and present it as science, while simultaneously claiming that we are, in their eye, a science denier or science deniers. Well, the reality of the situation is as follows. There is absolutely zero scientific evidence for us being on a spinning ball flying through a sky vacuum. None. Now, we have been taught at a very early age what the scientific method was. 5th grade, we all learn what the scientific method was. Now, for most of us, that's so far in our past that we don't really remember what we were taught or what the method actually entails, but we do remember that it was an empirical method because we were taught it as such. So this empirical method proves things, and that's very powerful if you're going to use a magic trick of asserting that you've got science when really you've just got a made-up story or a mathematical explanation for a reified model. If you say the word science and imply that people who are challenging you are science deniers, that will go over quite strongly in an audience member or a member of the general public when they hear it. Oh, the flat earth is just denying science. Because Neil deGrasse Tyson and Brian Cox, astrophysicists who offer absolutely no scientific hypotheses whatsoever, are in their opinion science, and they're not. Science, on the other hand, is a method of establishing the cause of an effect. Well, cause and effect reasoning, the scientific method, is proven through experimentation. Well, in the case of astrophysicists and cosmologists, all they're doing is offering up just so stories. They have plenty of phenomena to study. That would be dependent variables, naturally occurring phenomena, lights in the sky, things happening, that they could postulate a cause for. But they don't, because they have no way of actually varying and manipulating that which they assume causes these effects. So they just come up with a just so story and punt it as science. Now, there's an actual definition for what that becomes. If you are punting a just so story and calling it science when there has been no adherence to the scientific method, the actual term for that is pseudoscience, which is precisely what the globe offers. There is no scientific evidence, no cause and effect reasoning backed by hypothesis-based experimentation. That does not exist for the heliocentric model. Nor is there any theory, because scientific theory is based on validated experimentation. What they do is they take the colloquial theory, that would be a Mystic Meg theory, Nostradamus theory, and call it science. Well, this is our theory. Because people hear the word theory and think, oh, well, that's science. No, because a scientific theory is based on validated experimentation, something they don't have anything for when it comes to proving the globe. They have maths. They have models. They have their colloquial theory, which is just so stories. And that's all they have. So all of your talk of science, when it comes to gravity, absolutely no scientific method has been applied in any way, shape or form when describing either of the two different gravities. Shocking to some that might be listening to this. But there isn't just one. There's 106 years out-of-date Newtonian mass-attracting mass, and then there's the new hotness of the Einsteinian bending space-time, pseudo-Riemannian force space-time bending caused by the uneven distribution of mass in a mathematical model. Again, taking place in a realm that doesn't exist. Space-time, a conceptual medium, defined in the geometry by Einstein as pseudo-Riemannian force space. Yet you tell people some of this stuff and they're like, no, gravity holds the gas here. Like, no, it's not even a force. How's it held in gas here? Well, because if it wasn't, I'd be dead. Well, yeah, we would be. It's just that space is fake. Not that we can't qualify gravity correctly, because it's a concept, not a force.
Right. It operates kind of like an umbrella concept. They can retract it and expand it for whatever gap they have within their theorem or whatever you want to assert that it is. It's ultimately just sort of a projectionist fairy tale, because they're creating a superimposition that they're connecting to phenomenal occurrence and then extrapolating inference and inductive elements from it as though that was a substitute for actual experimentation.
Well, kind of.
Because they don't have any experiments.
106 years ago, they would infer that there was a manifestation of a phenomena, but they manufactured it. In other words, they conjure a phenomena within a man-made apparatus called the Cavendish, whatever you call it. They call it an experiment.
Right. Proposed pendulum, right.
Well, not the pendulum, the two balls in a shed. Well, they assert with Newtonian principles that that's mass attracting mass, what they would have called 106 years ago gravity. Whereas now, because there is no force of gravity, there is no mass attracting mass, there is no pull towards the centre of a presupposed spherical Earth, you can debunk this downward acceleration at 9.8 metres per second by letting go of a helium balloon, instantly violating their claim of a downward vector at 9.8 metres per second. Boil a kettle and watch the steam go up. Yeah, violating that complete nonsense, that there's a overriding downward vector towards the Earth, a force of gravity. So because of that little problem, they take it into the conceptual, a place that doesn't exist, a place with 4 dimensions, length, breadth, depth, and time. Well, space-time, where the bending of such a medium we don't exist in takes place, that would be the current gravity. That doesn't exist. It's a conceptual realm. We're not existing in pseudo-4 space. It's merely a mathematical geometry to describe the bending of space-time caused by the uneven distribution of mass in a place that we don't exist in.
That's why you have to believe in science. You have to believe in it. I've seen T-shirts here in the States. I believe in science. And I mean, I immediately know those are the dumbest people.
Exactly. Well, science is empirical, and as much as I say we've been taught this in 5th grade, it's only recent years where quantum erasers actually re-educated me in what I was originally taught in school to understand the empirical nature, only for it to be later used in the next classroom with just so stories under a banner of science. But that aside, the method itself is actually empirical. There's no belief required. In other words, the method has a part of the method that gives it empiricism, and that method is the null. So in a hypothesis, there's two sides to it. One side of the hypothesis says that which you assume causes the effect in nature will cause the effect in nature when varied. So if A, then B. If I vary this, it will cause that thing I'm studying, that effect I've noticed happening in nature. So I vary A, B happens. Well, that's called your alternative hypothesis. It's what you're trying to prove. It's your best guess of what causes the effect being actually varied to see if it causes it. But in the hypothesis, you also have a null, which is if A, I vary this thing I think causes the effect, not B, the effect doesn't happen. Well, both of those are part of the hypothesis, both if A, then B, and if A, not B. And at the end of experimentation, that would be the actualization of said hypothesis. Upon actualization, one or other of those two predictions will be proven. So you vary A, and either it will cause the effect, or it won't cause the effect. Well, if it does cause the effect, you've validated your alternative hypothesis. If A, then B, tick, true, because you varied A and it caused B. If, on the other hand, you vary A and it doesn't cause B, tick, you validated your null. You put a tick next to it because you varied A and, as predicted, it did not cause B. So at the end, one or the other will be validated, proven. Well, that's powerful. Empiricism. you've got an absolute certitude at the end of the experimentation process. Well, if you didn't cause the effect, you need to vary something else to assume what it caused. So just to pad this out and give it a proper example, if you come across a boiling hot spring and go, oh, I wonder what caused that. You go, I don't know, maybe the acid content. Excuse me. if A, acid content, then B, boiling hot spring. Well, your null is if A, acid content, not boiling hot spring. So then you move on once you've got all of your control variables in place, things which will remain constant to not affect the outcome of the test. You then vary your presumed cause, that's A in this example, acid content, and see if it causes B, the boiling hot spring. Well, you vary the acid content and nothing happens. Well, what do you know? You've validated your null hypothesis. Acid content does not cause boiling hot spring. Right. Well, then you try a different alternative, which would be if heat, right? If I heat it up, it boils. And you're null in that example, just to give it a full roundness. If heat, not boiling water, well, you apply heat and it boils. Well, then you put a tick next to your alternative hypothesis, instantly invalidating your null, but validating your alternative. So that is how you go through this method of empiricism. And the point of me telling you all this is that gives them a magic trick to say those words, because you've been taught as a kid that there's an empirical method that proves things. So when they say the Earth's a sphere, science says so, you're going to believe it's empirically proven.
You know, Nathan, here you articulate it very well, but at the end of the day, those are childlike concepts. You know, that's how children learn before they're, quote, taught, you know, the wrong way of thinking about things in the brainwashing centers, the daycares. That's how they figure out what the world is. And I feel like if people were not brainwashed out of them, people would be more readily coming to these conclusions on their own. They actually have to obfuscate their own perception of the world. They have to literally make them project a false version of it, you know. And it's like, I've heard so many people say, for example, I've been on a plane and I've seen the curve. And it's like, no, your mind's eye saw a curve. You didn't see a curve. Maybe the window was curved and you superimposed this, you know, your belief system on what you saw and are just saying it, but you didn't actually see it because it's not perceptible. And that can be proven by experimentation, to you know, as you say.
But then there's the whole thing of, you know, convenience. Well, I'd rather just believe someone who appears to be more authoritative on this subject instead of actually, you know, going about experimenting things for myself. And that allows, again, this sort of expertocracy where they can fine tune whatever the conditions and perception limits are within an experiment and just basically force feed people a worldview, a Weltanschauung that doesn't correspond to reality at all, but people end up becoming contented with that illusion. They prefer the illusion.
It's an interesting one when you talk about people perceiving a curve or describing a curve from a high altitude plane, because that's another subject which the globers would like you to argue about. Because again, it works on the premise that what you're seeing out the window at the horizon is a physical geometric sphere edge. And you're going to argue about whether or not it bends, and if it's bent, what's caused it to be bent. Because all of those arguments work on the pretense that that horizon that you're seeing is a physical sphere edge, i.e. the edge of the world that the boats will go over, that the Earth curve maths qualifies, how much they'll be blocked by the bottom of the sphere edge horizon. So when they say, I can see the horizon bending, wonderful news for a glober, because they can argue about that all day long without you as the flat earther appreciating that you're arguing about a not actual location as a physical sphere edge by automatic presupposition.
Right. Yeah. It's more of a construct of our own perception than it is physical, but they suppose it's physical.
Exactly.
Right. They're
exactly
using an optical phenomena and hijacking the optical phenomena and turning it into a reified sphere model phenomena, right? It's geometric fallacy, essentially.
Exactly. it's a begging the question fallacy. They presuppose that we've got a radius value. They turn the world side on in the mathematics so that they can remove the optical phenomena that we actually experience. That would be perspective. So if you look at an Earth curve calculator, the way they depict the world is side on. So you'll see the side of your own head on the left-hand side of the page, and the only cause of things disappearing into the distance on the right-hand side of the page, that would be Earth curve obstruction in a geometric view. Well, that orthographic representation, i.e. you seeing the side of your own head and the target at the same time, means that you can remove the angular relationship. So when you look out at something in the distance, number one, you don't see the side of your own head. Number two, the apparent size, the not actual size of anything you're viewing, gets smaller with distance. But in the Earth curve maths, the target size remains the same at any distance. Therefore, you can draw you on the left-hand side of the page, a mountain on the right, and say the mountain's 1,000 feet, you're 6 feet, but then you can draw a line between the two and write 1 million miles on it. And none of the measurements will be inaccurate. It's still you're 6 foot, it's 1,000 feet, there's 1 million miles between you. But because on their depiction in orthographic view, on a straight line flat surface, there's nothing getting in the way between you and the mountain. So say, why can't you see a mountain at 1,000 miles then? Why can't you see Paris from New York? Well,
Right.
It's too small. But in their representation, they've removed perspective. So therefore, when things start to disappear from the bottom due to angular limitations, they'll say it's Earth curve getting in the way at the horizon, which is then physically reified into a sphere edge through their mathematics.
Right. So it's, in this Pythagorean sort of fallacious methodology of, sort of convincing people using power of suggestion and mathematics, do you think that this has a technical limitation, this fine-tuning ability for them to just sort of make shit up as they go? I mean, because it seems to me where in many fields of science, this continues to demonstrate a pattern where there's this, reification fallacy. They superimpose a model onto a phenomena, and they just get people to think that that's what's happening without supplying any sort of alternative. I wonder how far you think the deceit goes and the lying goes within so-called the pseudoscience masquerading as genuine empirical science.
Perfect.
Like
excellent question. It goes as far as the horizon. That is the best answer I can give. So, it does.
Wow.
The horizon is the beginning and end of their argument. If the Earth is a sphere, the limitation, as you asked about that specifically, would be the sphere edge horizon. That is the geometric limitation of a sphere if we're stood on one. It's a hill getting in the way between you and something you view in the distance. It's physical. Well, the horizon isn't. It moves with the weather, and we can demonstrate beyond all certitude that it's beyond the physical limitations of a physical sphere beneath your feet. Further to that, all the measurements you can dig out show it's flat. So next time someone asserts that there's 8 inches per mile drop, take them to Google Earth and say, show it me. It's all measured flat. There's no drop anywhere. Do an elevation profile across any distance in Google Earth. There's no 8 inches per mile drop. It's all flat.
Yeah, and I went to film school, so I learned a bit about lenses and how cameras operate and so on. And when I saw these high zoom cameras pulling a ship and its hull right into view, and that was like prima facie axiomatic, self-evident evidence. But then the arguments against it get into the realm of complete magic. We're gonna it's just a mirage. It's the image of the ship that's refracted from around the curve, and it's like by what mechanism?
Well, I can tell you that too. The mechanism that they refract it around the curve is something called terrestrial refraction, otherwise known as standard refraction. And in standard form, it's 7/6 of the Earth's radius. So what they're doing is begging the question and then begging the question again. So they assume Earth is a sphere with a radius of 3959. And then they assume that the light...
Right, the infamous R value.
Yeah, it's all based on R. Well, it's been debunked. The black swan argument debunks the Earth as a sphere because the radius value is derived from the physical sphere edge horizon by Al-Biruni. So to get R, to move things with R, you need to measure R, which means you need a horizon that's physical to derive the R, as Al-Biruni did with his dip angle measurement. Well, if the horizon's not physical, you can't get R. So the next time they bark refraction at you for any way or form, for any argument, point out that you haven't got an R value because you haven't got a physical geometric sphere edge for a horizon. So you can't measure R. Al-Biruni can't get a dip angle measurement. And if it's refracted, that would be the line from you to the horizon is bent. Then how are you going to do geometry? That particular line in their maths is the tangent, a requirement to do geometry. The line between you and the physical sphere edge, that's the tangent point, the horizon in their model, that's got to be straight. The moment they bend it and say it's refracted, you can't do geometry anymore. Again, the black swan argument debunks the R value and the geometry, so you can't refract things because they're refractions. Terrestrial refraction based on R, and we've debunked R.
You know, obviously you've committed yourself to this and changing the conversation to one that is oriented around reason, logic, and observable facts, right? But there's just so much apathy out there as far as flat Earth. And, you know, I've heard it said, I'm sure you have as well, well, you know, even if you have a good argument, even if there are a bunch of holes that deserve investigating, people are like, well, that's not as important of an issue. That's a distraction. You know, we're coming up against such and such. How do you deal with those people, Nathan, who believe that this is a frivolous endeavor for you to try and change, but to me, just my opinion before you answer that, I mean, if it's true that we've been lied to about the entire reality. I mean, I couldn't imagine a more important subject.
Precisely.
Well,
But
yeah.
how do you deal with people? I'm sure you care about somebody who thinks that, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, exactly. If they can lie to you about the very nature of the ground beneath your feet and the vacuum above your head in their estimations, then they can lie to you about basically anything. And that's what it all boils down to. It's about control. And they have absolute control over all aspects of your life and your perceived reality. That's how far it goes. Right down to the air you breathe, because that's called atmosphere. That would be air, atmo, sphere. Well, sphere-shaped air is an oxymoron. We don't have air that's in the shape of a sphere. It takes the shape of its container. There must be containment for us to have gas pressure. But part of your vernacular, part of your language, will describe the paradigm of the world they want you to live in, to keep control of you. Even the air you breathe is controlled by your own language, which you were trained with from birth.
Isn't it interesting, though, that planet, which supposes the globe, it's plain T with a T at the end of it.
It's almost
like they're laughing at you.
Hidden in plain view, kind of linguistic sleight of hand there.
No, they got to control the language because they want to control your thoughts.
Right.
And that's definitely where it gets rubber meets the road for me as far as the flat Earth issue. It's such a worthwhile topic.
It is.
And actually, when you learn, even in school, I don't know how these days, but they did teach me that, for the majority of the written history of humankind, which is a whole nother subject of debate. They said like 6,000 years. Okay. But let's just say that that's true, right? They tell you the majority of that time, we've all been flat earthers. And it's only in this very recent period of time where we have become enlightened. Relatively recent time, right?
Right.
How
do you, it's hard to exist in this world, isn't it, Nathan, to where things are so upside down?
You can't die on every cross, basically. So what you're kind of saying is, how do you explain to somebody that their entire worldview and paradigm is controlled? It's
triggering.
It's hard for me to answer because this is going to sound terrible. I don't care. If you want to leave the discussion, I don't. It's just the thing. If you want to believe the Earth's a sphere in the face of glaring evidence to the contrary, what that will leave my opponent on the debate with is cognitive pain, sleepless nights, concerns, worries, fears about what might be, should it be the case that we've all been lied to. Well, these are serious things that I also have contemplated. Oh my God. Does it really go that far? Well, yeah, it does. The world still carries on, though, doesn't it? Regardless of you knowing how much you're under control and how much you exercise a detachment from that as a result. Well, trying to convince Joe Normie that they should exercise a certain degree of detachment is a bit like the discussion Morpheus has with Neo when he's in the construct training him and he sees the woman in the red dress. He's explaining him to the vast majority of the people who are connected to the system, and that's what we're describing when we say control. It's the system of control. When we talk about things like the heliocentric deception, the history hoax, all of those sorts of things, they're all methods of control. Most people are so hopelessly addicted and enamored with the system that they are attached to that they will fight to defend it. So what's the point? If you can convince them, wonderful. But if you can't convince them and you present them with the information, you should just not concern yourself, because it's their bag at the end of the day. You can't control people in that regard. That's the whole point. The reason we're in the situation is because somebody somewhere at some stage has gone, I want to retain control over everybody. And here's how we'll do it. Here's the means and methods that we'll employ to do so. And they have. Well, do I want to take that bag? Do I want to run with that baton? No. Therefore, I'll disseminate the information. I'll debate based on what is correct within the parameters of what I understand, what is right and what is wrong, and give my arguments and points. But if the person I'm debating with is not convinced at the end of that, I don't care.
Right. Isn't it funny how anti-vaxxers, flat earthers, climate change deniers, which is another very interesting linguistic subject, they're all getting lumped. Oh, and those who disagree with lockdown, they're all lumped into the same pile of shit that should be banished from society. I don't know if you can see our screen, but I've got an article up here about this guy who sabotaged a bunch of vaccines, and he's been revealed by the FBI to be a flat earther.
Oh yeah, he probably has nothing to do with the intelligence agencies either. When he says, "Oh yeah, this guy was actually a shield put up by the government to prevent us from seeing God." I mean, so you
controlled
see,
opposition
and controlled opposition. So, but you see how this, I like to. You go back to the language point that you brought up, that it's almost like the terminology flat earther or flat earth, because of the linguistic programming around the associations of flatness and Mother Earth in space and all this stuff, that it's almost like a trigger terminology designed to shut down any sort of open-mindedness and to just sort of act as a magnet of ridicule, even though it is very much a self-explanatory term. There is a kind of cognitive dissonance where people, even though they can perhaps see the evidence as being against the globe, they don't want to think of themselves as a quote unquote flat earther.
Right.
And so one way that I have converted some people is, try to dispense with the labels a little bit of flat earther and just realize that there is plenty of reasons to be skeptical about the globe, and that the realm and the ground upon which you live doesn't seem to have a limit, and it has topographical features, but it's ultimately level. Like, can't that just be an obvious realization, point of realization? And, some people end up being like, you know what? Yeah. But it's again, a frightfully small percentage, unfortunately. But I think that it is growing. It's just, it's hard in this, censorship environment to sort of see those kind of metrics anymore, because they censored the metrics now to see like the search results and everything, and they poison the well with the results and everything. So they do see it as a threat in terms of the control grid, the system of control. It doesn't like aberrations in worldview. It doesn't like an understanding that operates on an empirical independent basis from their official lies, basically. And so they have to use this label as a weapon to derogate and criminalize, perhaps even people who have that independent operating worldview. So that's kind of the ominous direction in which I may want to ask, like, do you think that it is basically known by world authorities that we're not on a sphere, and that they are extremely concerned about a mass awakening regarding that?
I really have no idea. I don't pay attention to a great deal of this stuff. So I'm looking at your screen now with this vaccine saboteur, Stephen Bradenbury, is a flat earth something
Brandenburg,
or other.
as in like Brandenburg Concerto. Like it's just
Brandenburg.
some of these names are odd too.
I just see this as propaganda. I mean, you've already identified it exactly the way I would. I'd say, well, putting this on flat earthers to pour scorn on flat earthers, that's nothing new. And tying anti-vaxxers to flat earthers again, that makes perfect sense in the eyes of propaganda. But I just don't pay attention to it because it affects me in a negative way. In the same way this has probably concerned you, right? Oh no, what's the impression of the general public on flat earth as a result of this? Well, again, I don't care. In some ways it works to my advantage. So when you talk about the demeaning that people will give a flat earther and the general low opinion people have of a flat earther, that definitely works to my advantage. So people will come onto the debate, and unless they've watched at least for a reasonable amount of time, if they just come in and go, these idiots, they get a very rude awakening. Because like I say, we only had one yesterday in the chat section. So some of the uncut and after shows on my second channel, on the Nathan Oakley channel, you can actually chat. You'd have to be a member of the channel to chat. And a lady came in yesterday, Fiona her name was, and immediately said, well, I'm here for the entertainment value and, to tell you guys what's what. In other words, the assumption by her was that we were very stupid and that she could have a good laugh at us and then tell us what's what. And within a few minutes of being in the chat, she's there talking about hypothesis and explanations for a heliocentric presupposition of orbits. You're like, okay, what's a hypothesis? And this person immediately, instinctively starts saying, you're bullying me, you're bullying me. It's like, no, you've used the word. What does it mean? Let's see.
Right.
And I had to point out to her that my show is definitely not labelled as entertainment. It's not labelled as comedy. It's labelled as education. And I take great offence when someone like her comes along and says, I'm going to have a good laugh at you idiots, which is basically what she was saying, in a very polite and kind way that she did. Well, no. What you'll find is that what the show offers, what Flat Earth Debate offers, is an education. An education in science, an education in the natural world, an education in the nonsense that we've been lied to about. Now, none of those things I find amusing. I take it very, very seriously. But people think we're thick. Well,
that's
like I say,
that's
they
what I
get
was
it
getting at earlier, is this idea that you're a knuckle dragger for being a flat earther, but
meanwhile you're educating them on their own worldview that they don't even know how to defend.
Right.
And that's the incredible just phenomena that I continue to witness. And I can't put my finger on it. I guess it's just it's sort of Orwellian and doublethink. You have to hold two contradictory things simultaneously as though they're both true, and that's, I guess, people are conditioned to have that orientation.
Yeah, and Nathan, I brought up this article to get your thoughts, because it does concern me, but not so much the social acceptance or social perception aspect of it, but more because I see these things as being more or less thought crimes. And I'm sure in the UK, as it is over here, the almost unstoppable march towards this censorship, and the next step, of course, is just arrest, or people just disappearing. So I'm curious to know, it seems like you do this full time. Do you earn a living from the flat earth debate? Is that your primary source of income? And what will happen if YouTube just sort of flicks the switch? Which frankly, obviously they for shadow banning and other algorithmic techniques and stuff, they probably already have. I know they already publish like a flat earth policy and you don't go out of your way too much to sort of obfuscate. You're very much front and center out with it, the flat earth debate, which I respect enormously.
Definitely.
But yeah, where are you at on censorship and all? Is it just YouTube for the foreseeable future? Or are you looking at other alternatives?
Okay, well, there's two parts, so I'll answer the first bit first. In terms of this article, what do I think about it? Well, it is definitely propaganda, and the main element of any control in this regard is fear. That's how they control you. it's primordial in terms of, or primeval in terms of how your brain is structured. There's a couple of things that you instinctively want to do, right? Number one, don't die. Number two, reproduce. But most of all, don't die. Well, that is what they're utilizing. That is fear. It's used in sales, in the death cell. I'll give you an interesting one. I don't know if this is true across America as it is across Europe. Have you ever seen on a cigarette packet where they've got a picture of people with horrific diseases? That sells more cigarettes. Did you know that? Called the death cell.
Interesting.
It's an interesting marketing ploy. Most people will have heard of the sex cell, right? That's fairly self-explanatory. Well, it's working on the same exact part of your brain, the reproduce part brain, right? Go out, get laid, make kids. That is an instinctual part of your brain, and your brain's telling you to do it a lot. But it's also, like I say, more often than not saying, don't die, don't walk in front of that bus, be careful, look in case that animal will get you. Your brain's constantly working on that premise, don't die. Well, that fear is very, very, very easy to manipulate. And this is an aspect of that. And they utilize very clever Bernaysian, is that the correct term? I think it is.
Yep.
Yes.
Methods to scare you. So I had to point this out with a friend of mine, Sleeping Warrior. So he started pointing out to me that somebody, according to the propaganda he was presenting to me, had died of a vaccination. And I said, look, you've got to understand that the fear of the sniffles was what originally was used to control people and lock them down. And then the fear of the vaccine solution is now being used to scare people and keep them under control, right? So it doesn't matter if it's the solution to the manufactured problem that is being used to scare people or the problem itself. It makes no difference. It's all just as effective. So the way I deal with that is to detach myself from it as much as possible. That's the first answer, the first half.
Yeah.
The other half, in terms of my own censorship on YouTube, that's already happened. So there's been... we were allowed to run Riot for the better part of 2014, 2015, and we were in the algorithm. People could find us. That's how I found Math Powerland, and that's how people found me while I was building up my channel. And subsequent to that, what they have then done is said that anything that is of this nature, and I don't know how they distinguish, there must be some dude somewhere going through it and deciding that they're pro-flat Earth, therefore require censorship. And these people, on the other hand, are anti-flat Earth. Therefore, if you type in flat Earth, you will get all of the anti-flat Earth listings predominantly shown to you. Well, that's already been established in the algorithm, and we've been defined as fringe. In other words, because we're fringe, we're not going to be recommended, and that's just the way it is now. Because of the anti-flat Earth movement, that actually offers a certain degree of security to someone like me. In other words, if they get rid of me because I'm covering flat Earth, then they'll have to get rid of Simon Dan because he's covering flat Earth, regardless of if he's pro or con. You know, it works both ways. So they've established it that pro-flat earthers won't reach the recommendations page, whereas anti-flat earthers will. I have to accept that. That's my bag. I'm a YouTuber, first and foremost. Might not sound like it, given the amount of passion I've got for flat Earth. Obviously, I'm passionate about the subject, but I'm more passionate about making videos for YouTube. What I want to be when I grow up is a YouTuber. So that's what I would call myself first and foremost, before a flat earther. I mean, family man before YouTuber, but you know, that's what I do. So making videos is most certainly what I want to be doing, and it's what I've wanted to do for a very long time. I've had a YouTube account making videos for better part of 10 or 12 years. So yeah, it's something that I wanted to do full time, and are now privileged with the subject that I cover in flat Earth to be able to do it full time. And like anybody who transitions to a full time YouTube career, takes a monumental amount of work to get to that position. But I won't go into that and bore you.
Yeah, we've been trying to bolster our metrics, right? And I think we got like 200 subscribers, and it's just it's a drag getting to that 1,000 where you can start to use the community feature. And yeah, I mean, you've done a great job and a great service, and we definitely see what you're doing as education, and we see what we're doing as well as sort of the future of education. This sort of long form dynamic discussion where we can really unpack these things, as opposed to CNN, which is just a bunch of sound bites speckled with pharmaceutical advertisements in between. So yeah, we really appreciate you coming out
Absolutely.
to have this discussion. The other thing we do, you mentioned Bernays, is we like to play, pop culture, music videos or movie trailers or advertisements or things in current events to sort of tee off discussions. I'm curious if you've seen this Hennessy advertisement, which features Auguste Piccard, the scientist who was into the hot air balloon making. You familiar with this?
I think I might have done. Is it from about a year or two ago? It features a dome.
Yeah, a dome of water. It's like
right. Yeah, it's sort of a weird water above the air sort of effect.
Yes,
check this
I have
out.
seen this. Yes.
When a man reaches the edge, as far as any man can possibly go, how does his son continue?
I just find it really fascinating, the imagery of the whole thing, where the Earth that they show, it's kind of perceivably flat.
Right.
And yet they're in this spherical object. They show this domed eyeball. They focus on a spherical droplet of water. It's just amazing how they subliminally message us things in
and it's like he's supposed to reach the deepest point and they're like connecting over like achievement, but what precisely is his son looking at? Some CGI, whatever it is, like it's mythology essentially. Yeah. They use mythology in advertisement to lower the brain waves and make people more suggestible, more impressionable, and that's Exhibit A for world conception in the form of power of suggestion
and a hologram. Basically getting you to project a certain reality.
Like a recommendation. I got a
using your empiricism to pick it apart.
A channel called Nathan Bell, and if you search the Great Subliminal Message Deception, he does a couple of maybe an hour and a half, 2 hour documentaries on this subject. But also, if you type that exact search term, the Great Subliminal Message Deception, you'll come across about a 7 or 8 minute video where Nathan Bell takes the handbook for subliminal advertising and just reads some of it, and so shows you some of the techniques. He also has got a few snips from old advertising agencies where they have like promotional explanations with actual ads that have reached print, and showing how they were airbrushed and how the subliminal messages were embedded in them, or what levels, what distances you can see them, all that sort of stuff. Nathan Bell, check him out, you'll love it.
Good stuff. Thanks for the reference.
Definitely gonna check that out.
Well, Nathan, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show once again. If you want to watch the Flat Earth debate, it happens 2 p.m. UK time daily, which is 9 a.m. Eastern, 8 Central, on YouTube. Nathan Oakley1980 is the channel. You can also, on Zetetic.news, you can come over to the tab here, navigate to Flat Earth Debate, where you'll see the airing times. You can also visit Nathan's shop to buy some merchandise. And of course, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment on his channel. Xavier, is there anything else you want to ask Nathan while we still have him?
I'm just looking forward to your new posts and future collaborations. I think that we're kind of on the little bit of the tip of the philosophical spear when it comes to piercing through all of the various deceptions and Decepticon tactics that are in replete fashion just about everywhere. And hopefully more people, there'll be kind of a domino effect, and there'll be sort of a great reckoning over the next hopefully 5 to 10 years, where it's just beyond doubt the extent to which this manufactured paradigm is essentially bankrupt of any kind of legitimacy, and the extent of that paradigm is much greater than what people kind of want to admit, but they ultimately have to confront. So I think that's it's good topics there for sure.
Cool.
Nathan, any parting words?
No, just reiterate the top three. The Earth is not a sphere for the following reasons. There is no Coriolis effect. The Earth does not turn underneath anything at 15 degrees an hour. The sky is not a vacuum. It stands in violation of the second law of thermodynamics. And the horizon is not a physical geometric sphere edge. And subscribe to my channel, NathanOakley1980, and my second channel for Flat Earth Debate and Flat Earth Debate Uncut and After Shows. That's NathanOakley1980.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you
Really
very
appreciate
much
your
for having
time.
me.
Cheers.
Cheers.
What a lovely day!